I'm very pleased to be here, but I want to apologize right now and say I can't stay very long. I'm on a book tour. And if any of you know about book tours, you know that even allowing me to come this morning is a massive concession. My dear compassion colleague in Pakistan, when he looked at my schedule, said, "Karen, after this, you'll be able to write a book on modern slavery." So I have to leave after this, but my thoughts will be with you. It is wonderful that you're here, that we're trying to make compassion a dynamic force in our tragically polarized world. And I just want to start with a good old adage. Charity, it said, begins at home. And that is certainly true. But it can't end there. All the great sages and philosophers who established the Golden Rule said that you must not confine your benevolence to your own group. You must have what one Chinese sage called yan ai, concern for everybody. In Buddhist meditation, you begin by sending out compassionate thoughts to those around you, but then you extend it to the ends of the earth, not omitting a single creature from this radius of concern. Sorry, picked up a cough on this tour. And I would like you, in everything you're doing today, to try and see how you can start to think globally. Because our world is now so intimately interconnected that we cannot live without one another. Our histories are intertwined. I say this as a British person because I'm well aware that had the British behaved according to the Golden Rule in their colonies during our imperial age, we would not be having so many political problems today. And our behavior in the Middle East has helped to create ISIS, or IS, or whatever it's calling itself at the moment. We need to go behind the headlines and try and look deeply into what is really happening. Go beyond the sound bites and think how you can do it. Whether you're working in compassion in your own city, or your compassion in education, or healthcare, or law, or media studies, how can you make a difference to extend your benevolence to people you don't necessarily like? Love the foreigner, says Leviticus. If a stranger lives with you in your land, do not molest him. You must treat him as one of your own people and love him as yourself, for you were strangers in Egypt. Look into your own heart, remember what happened, how it was when you were an ethnic minority, and do not apply that do not impose that feeling on anybody else in your country. The word love needs a bit of decoding. The word has become so degraded in many ways. Oh, I love ice cream. Didn't you love that movie? It's in the ancient Near East, however, the term hesed was used in international treaties. It was a legal term. Two kings who may have been enemies previously promised to love one another. And that didn't mean they would fall into each other's arms or become best friends, but that they would look out for one another, giving each other practical help, coming to their aid in times of trouble, even putting their own immediate interests to one side in order to be a good ally. And I think now that unless we apply the golden rule globally, even to those, as the Charter says, even to those we regard as enemies, love your enemies, said Jesus, we are not going to have a viable world. Because we're not encouraged, really. The nation state, which was devised to help us through our industrialization and helped to mobilize the nation for industry. It does not encourage us to look beyond our borders. At election time, people are always talking about domestic affairs, taxation, and all those internal things, and the welfare of the nation is paramount. But it's not helping us, really, in our globalized world. We've now got to extend that benevolence to have concern for everybody. It's always been my dream that with this wonderful network of cities of compassion that we are creating, that we should twin some of these cities, so that a city in Pakistan is twinned with a city in the United States, and that gradually we can learn about one another. The young people can exchange emails, develop electronic friendships, so that gradually some of the misapprehensions we have about one another can be put aside. The nation state has a fatal flaw. It was predicted by Lord Acton in the late 19th century, he was a British historian, that because the nation places such emphasis on ethnicity, language, and culture, that those who did not fit the national profile could experience great difficulty. He said they could be enslaved or even exterminated. And the tragic history of the 20th century shows that he was a true prophet, starting with the Armenian massacre by the Young Turks during World War I to create a purely Turkic state, carrying on with Auschwitz, and finishing the century when religious passion is fused with modern secular nationalism, and you have the catastrophe of Bosnia. And so we're not exterminating people in Britain, you'll be pleased to know, but there is great xenophobia growing up in my country. People are demonizing the European Union. Now, I know the European Union has many flaws, but I see it as a triumph of human nature. 100 years ago, in World War I, we Europeans were beginning to slaughter one another. And now we can sit together and decide things in the same room. But I think this is happening too here. Great discussion about immigration. And we don't want a stranger to live in our land. We don't want to treat him as one of our own people and love him as ourselves. And this is partly due to the nation state. There's always been this harshness in modern thought. We're very proud of our modern values, toleration, human rights. These are excellent and admirable values. But from the very start, there was a seed of exclusivity. Locke, John Locke, who influenced your founding fathers so much, was the apostle of toleration. But he said that the liberal state could not tolerate either Catholics or Muslims. Human rights was also one of the things that Locke was pioneering. But he made it clear that life, liberty, and property did not apply to the peoples of the New World that was opening up to Europeans at this time. The Native Americans, he said, had no right to their land. It could be taken from them by force. And a master, he said, had absolute and despotical power over a slave, which included the right to kill him at any time. So don't let us imagine that peace will break out if we just institutionalize this secularism. Secularism has been as violent in its own way in its short history. Now, I want to consider just for a little while the story of Jacob and Esau. Famous story, we all know it, story of two brothers who can't either live with one another or without one another. They're fighting in their mother's womb. And God says, you have in your womb two nations. It's a political allegory as well as a personal one. Jacob, father of the 12 tribes of Israel, his name is also Israel. He stands for the kingdom of Israel. And Esau, the Bible tells us, is Edom, the neighbor of Israel with whom there were difficult relations at the time when this story was being written down. Yet they are twins. And I think this is a profound point. When we lambast and are vituperative about our enemies, and we are vituperative. I get a lot of this hate mail and stuff. If I write an article on Islam, I'm deluged with electronic hate. This is something we simply cannot afford anymore. But when we have an enemy, we tend to meditate on his bad qualities. He becomes essential to our sense of ourselves. He stands for everything that we believe that we are not. In so doing, he becomes our alter ego. We look into the eye of the enemy and we see ourselves coming back, perhaps in a distorted form. But they are brothers. And we, in our globalized world, are brothers and sisters of everybody now. We cannot, as I say, live without one another. So intertwined are the global markets that we've created that when stocks fall in one part of the world, markets plummet all around the globe that day. What is happening in Iraq and Syria today has already had a blowback effect in Canada, and we'll have more. We have helped, we Europeans certainly have helped to create this catastrophe. Our histories are intertwined. And so we must now take our compassion, but always keep on extending it. Now, Jacob and Esau, they are twins. There's a moment when Jacob wrestles with a mysterious stranger, and he's just going to meet his brother Esau after decades away, having deprived Esau of his birthright, and he's terrified that when he goes back home into the promised land, the next day Esau will kill him, and he sends gifts across ahead of him to try and pacify his brother. And that night, he wrestles all night with a mysterious stranger. And he's wrestling with himself, with his brother, and with what we call God. That's how there is a divine encounter, a divine blessing, or an enlightenment when we wrestle with our brother and ourselves. And let's just look at ISIS for a moment. It's monstrous, it's appalling, it's everything that people say. And yet it's not barbaric, it's not a return to ancient barbarism, it's a very modern movement. Mass killing has been a characteristic of modernity, and we've just seen that. During the French Revolution, which produced the first secular nation state in Europe, 17,000 people were publicly beheaded in 1 year. ISIS is very modern in its handling of the valuables and resources that it is stealing and looting. And it is It's tearing down the nation state, reflecting the unease that we are beginning to feel about the nation state. These states set up by the Europeans about 100 years ago that really had no hope of surviving. Borders were so arbitrary. So when we look at ISIS, we see, in a sense, ourselves, and a sense of twinness, a sense of our distorted double, and karma, the word karma, that our actions have consequences. So I think that in everything we do, when we're trying to make our own cities, our own schools, our own workplaces, our own families, centers of kindness, compassion, and warmth, and respect, we must do what the great sages said, and try and to extend this sympathy feeling with the other, because they are our brothers, they are our friends. We have created them. When Cain killed his brother Abel, God said to him, "Where is your brother?" And he said, "I don't know. Am I the guardian of my brother?" And God said, "What have you done? Hark, your brother's blood is crying to me from the soil." Today, as I've said, we are all brothers and sisters of one another. We rightly castigate, quite rightly castigate, those terrorists who kill innocent civilians. But we must remember that the biggest murderer of civilians has been the state, our states. In World War I, only 5% of the people who died were civilians. In World War II, that number shot up to 66.5%. The Allies deliberately targeted German and Japanese residential areas in their cities in order to terrorize the population. And today, 90% of the people who are dying are civilians in our current wars. And we never seem to talk about them. It is right that we honor those soldiers who have died in the name of their country. But we must also spare a thought for the blood of our brothers and sisters who died simply because they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. I once was asked, what should a compassionate city be like? And I said, a compassionate city must be an uncomfortable city. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said, "Not one of you can be a believer if he can sleep when he knows that somebody is hungry." And we should all feel that profound discomfort as we look upon the suffering of our world. And a good practice, I think, when we are so deluged with images of suffering, perhaps deluged more than any previous generation, they beamed nightly into our homes on the evening news. And we should, instead of just pushing it out of our minds and preserving that carapace of selfish heartlessness because we can't bear it, what can we do anyway? Let it disturb us. Let it break into our complacency, because and take one of those pictures. Perhaps it's a mother holding a child who's died of the Ebola virus, or a refugee in Syria, a hopeless, and keep that with you through the day, bringing it to your mind and letting it disturb you. Am I the guardian of my brother? Said Cain. And the answer in our globalized world must surely be yes. So as we reflect today on you're going to have these wonderful workshops, and again, I'm sorry, I know I've seen it, thank you. I'm sorry I can't be with you, but my thoughts will be with you. But don't forget the bigger picture, the suffering people who can't be here today, but who are our brothers and sisters. Thank you very much.